Zoom recording. Thank you everyone for joining this second monthly call for the Driving Transformation Special Interest Group. Hopefully the time that you spent last time with Porus was useful, and I'm sure that the time that you'll spend today with Rahul and what he's about to share will be as useful or more so as well. So just so that everyone knows, Driving Transformation Special Interest Group is part of the India SAP User Group, Indus. And my role as part of Indus is to support the user group in whatever activities that the user group tries to do. My name is Mukesh Gupta and I'm an SAP employee. But as I always say, my salary comes from SAP, but I work for the user group. So having said that, I'd like to now introduce Rahul. Rahul, maybe instead of me talking about you, if you can just introduce yourself, some of the work that you've done, and take it away.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Mukesh. Thank you everyone for joining in. I'm Rahul. I work with the Group Strategy Office here at Mahindra. Basically, my role is kind of to be the digital transformation evangelist across the group, where I try to evangelize new technologies in existing businesses as well as explore new business opportunities for our group. I've been in this role for quite a while, actually about 4 years now. Have a long history of trying to do this in a legacy organization, before which before this, I had my own small solar startup that I used to run. And prior to that, for about 8 long years, I worked with the TVS group. This is a bit of my background. I'm particularly personally very interested in where digital can take us. And my interest was reached, I should say, a tipping point, which is something we'll talk about today. When I saw an app yesterday that taught you meditation to de-addict you from your mobile, and it was very ironic because it's an app that's on your mobile phone that's teaching you how to not use a mobile. And interestingly, I downloaded it, paid for it, and started using it. So I was. When I took a step back, I was like, really, is this what my life has come to? Has it become this digital that I need to get detox from digital by using digital? So that's where I'm at. And today's what I have for you is some of the insights that not only me, but as the Mahindra Group, that what we have realized on digital transformation and what kind of business models work. I'll also give you an overview of how we as a group think of digital transformation. What are the various areas of business that it actually impacts? How do we try to quantify this? Having said that, I'll quickly start off. So when we started off with what digital transformation was, there were multiple definitions. I mean, there were people who said digital transformation is creating an app, to all the way to a person saying digital transformation is taking a physical production log from the manufacturing shop floor and digitizing it. A large part of my first 6 months in the company was dedicated to defining what is digital transformation for us. So we came up with a definition that says digital transformation is using digital technology to radically improve the performance or to improve other metrics of any particular business or of any company in the group as such. While things like using digital technology for digitizing things is very good, and we live in a digital age. If it does not radically improve your performance or impact any other of your operational metrics, we really don't call it digital transformation. So we took a clear stance earlier that this should have a direct impact on the performance of the company, and that's why we drew the line between digital transformation and digitization, so to say. I actually go through a lot of cartoons. I generally relate to a lot of things in my life through cartoons. So the slides that you see will have a lot of cartoons, particularly from this gentleman called Tom Fishburne. I think he actually has a very satirical take on the things that we do in daily life. And during the initial part of my journey here, I related a lot more to the cartoons than the actual work that I did. So bear with me if you see a lot of this, but I think over the course of this presentation, you'll also hopefully relate to it as much as I do. The next part of once we defined what digital transformation was, we said there are certain set of rules that we will follow as a group that will help us deliver business value. And the first of which is getting leadership buy-in and commitment from the leadership, not only to invest in this, but also to give their time. Naturally, and this is particularly relevant to India, because India being very top-down, top-driven companies, you really need to have the buy-in of the leadership to actually invest and also give their time, because only then will you be able to drive these transformations across the group. But the second rule that we took upon ourselves, which uh, we feel is very important, is that whatever we do should create business value. In the end, your stakeholders need not really use digital tools to do their day-to-day businesses. They have existing set of processes. So before we ever embark on a digital transformation journey, we spend a lot of time in establishing the business value that this will do. While this may set us back a bit on timelines, may go against the grain of rapid development, etc., that is in vogue today. But this is something that we believe generates a lot of buy-in and also creates a very virtuous loop with rule number one. Once business leadership starts seeing value, they start investing more of their money and time into this. The rule number 3 onwards actually talk a lot about what digital transformation is and how it needs to be done. The first of which is when we look exactly at the customer, find out what are his needs, wants, and desires, and model the entire transformation journey around it. Being an end-to-end company, each transformation journey has a different customer. For example, I was working on a project earlier which dealt directly with the end customers of our cars. So we spent a lot of time understanding what are the pain points of those customers. And something that you would have seen that has come out of it is when we launched virtual reality-based sales tools for our dealership. So if any of you are looking at buying a Mahindra car, you can actually reach out to our dealership and they'll come home with a virtual reality based tool where you can actually experience a car in 3 dimensions, actually feel how the car looks, and actually even transport that car to any location that you want and see how it does. And I also work on projects that deal with internal customers being maybe shop floor operators, maybe people in supply chain who are out in the field trying to buy products, trying to see how digital works for them. So the definition of the customer really varies across the journey. And it's very critical that we first go into the customer's shoes to actually see what are his pain points, what are his needs, wants, and desires, and then model our whole transformation journey around it. The next point comes into sort of getting the back end to work for you. A lot of the time, digital transformation happens in isolation, where you end up creating an app. And what do you do with the app is something that you realize post hoc. We believe that your front end and back end, which by that, what I mean is, suppose you're creating an app, the data from the app should actually flow back to your servers, etc., so that your data from the customer starts getting enriched and you're able to capture that data and hence able to serve the customer better. So before you actually decide on what solution it is, you really need to understand the backend, understand what is as is, so that you can plan for the future and plan for any digital intervention that you're going for. Rule number 5 as such is about product market fit. And here I'll take a short step back. Now, if you sort of paid attention to the couple of points I mentioned earlier, we broadly follow the double diamond approach here, where you try to understand what the customer wants, then you sort of converge on a potential solution basis what capabilities that you have, and then you come up with a potential product. Rule number 5 actually expands. You go on the second diamond where you actually try to take this product and go to the market and actually see whether the idea, the product, the digital product that you've developed, does it actually have any fit in this whole scheme of things that you have thought of. So in a sense, now you go out with this product, try to establish its relevance in the market. Our personal experience is that this is the most critical phase. We actually ideate a lot. We come up with a very idealized solution, but when we go to the field, it's quite hard for us to translate this fit into what the market really wants. So this is this is a relatively critical point of this transformation journey. Rule number 6 comes to about how do you actually bring this all together. So you've gone out to the market, you've found out that the digital product that you've developed, actually there's a lot of fit. Rule number 6 actually talks about rule number 6 to about rule number 7 actually talk a lot about how do you actually implement it on the ground and how do you start getting its benefit. We strongly believe in the concept of partnerships. Partnerships may mean a lot of internal partnerships for us, given that we are a very diversified group, but we also look at external partnerships, external players that we can take on board in this journey, because they actually really speed up the adoption of any digital technology that you're doing, and B, it actually helps you at the time of deployment really rationalize on your cost aspect. So for example, when we are and it's out in the public, we have a e-mobility startup called Glide. And one of the first things that we did once we launched this product was we tried to look at which partners on the ground that we can actually take on board. As a result of which we have got, you would have read in the news that we have got Meru on board. So we really look at partnerships from both sides. So is there a need that we can satisfy for our partner and vice versa? And that's how we actually believe we can scale a lot of these things up quickly at a lower cost. Rule number 7 is all about business models. We'll spend a lot of time on it today. And the bigger thing that we believe, which is the buzzword in town, is creating platforms. We look at partnering with companies that have established platforms in developing digital products, or who have established businesses where we can sync up and try to deliver more value with them. So this is fundamentally how we try to run our digital transformation businesses. Rule numbers 8, 9, and 10 actually talk about the cultural aspect of what it entails. So now we have delivered a product, seen how it's going to make money, got a partner on board. 8, 9, and 10 will sort of tell you how you need to really sustain it, because once you develop it, it's really up to a particular business or a particular operating team to run it. And many a time there is a big gap in communication between this team and the business, because business is used to really running things in a particular way. And how does this particular team that's running this digital initiative, how do they actually communicate back to this team, and how do they get supported from the business? So the first aspect is about enabling a cultural revolution. So a lot of the projects, etc., that we take up is all about how do I change the mindset of people here. So for example, when I take a particular digital project, I will ask for having a daily stand-up meeting with the team, look at adopting agile methodologies which are very digital in nature into that team, and this will also percolate to business stakeholders so that they also start getting used to it. They start getting used to having updates on a daily basis, vis-a-vis having a monthly update or even a weekly update, all the way to the top leadership. So that's one way.
Sorry about that. I think my bad.
Yeah, no. So I think that's one way we actually really try to deliver this cultural change in the company. The second is relying on people. I think a lot of existing business structures, particularly in legacy companies like ours, rely more on processes than people. And digital is actually directly the opposite, where you rely a lot on people and their skill. So making people committed to this common goal and making sure that they deliver value is something that we need to really drive through the organization. And the last rule is being patient with it. Now, a lot of this digital transformation, particularly on the customer side, works on a lot of lag indicators for business, right? Unless you do a very operational transformation that will say give you a throughput increase then and there, you're really not going to see the transformation of it immediately. So eternal patience is something that we advocate. I'm eternally grateful that the management here has still not pulled me up saying, Are, you promised X% of PVT improvement, why it has not happened? So patience is very critical, but having the same at the same time, rule number 2, which is establishing business value, needs to sort of come out clearly in what you do. So these go hand in hand. So these 10 rules that we have sort of formulated guide us in any journey that we do and forms the core of how we operate. And when we see that businesses actually co-adopt all these 10 rules in some form, we actually see that digital transformation and disruptions are sustained. And now that we've sort of seen this, we'll sort of take a deeper dive into sort of understanding why this is very critical for us. So when we started off, the need for digital transformation.
Rahul, a quick question on my end. I think one of the challenges with the entire thing that you spoke about is also the fact that while leadership commitment is probably the rule number one that you spoke about, is not easy forthcoming when you've not done or when you don't have a track record and we're just starting. So how do you address that?
Sure. So for us, it started off with doing very, very small projects, right? We started off by actually building an app, like what everybody does. We built an app, and we could demonstrate very quantum values. How I'd like to describe it. Typically businesses look at say X percentage of return. We changed that equation and said, look, here is an app. I'm probably building this to you for maybe 10 or 20 odd lakhs, but am I able to deliver value that is in the crores to you because of this app? And that is actually when we could establish that business value, that the ability of that customer or new customers to actually use this app and generate that amount of value was when actually we started getting a lot of buy-in. The other important thing that we actually need to realize is that any digital transformation it actually creates a very virtuous cycle. I mean, you do one and it just keeps feeding onto creating more and more, right? Maybe we started off with creating a very basic app, but right now it leads to over time. So say 2 years ago, we created an app. Right now we are at a stage where businesses are willing to invest about at least 100 or 200 crores in embarking on a digital first journey. So the lead time, so to say, to become a very digital organization is relatively short. The main reason being that it is a virtuous cycle. But for you to pick, like what Mukesh was saying, that one thing that delivers business value that you can actually see is very critical. And that's where we'll again rely on the customer journey and establishing business value and choosing the right business model.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Rahul, sorry, this is Vivek Chandra. A thought. If we look at the 10 rules, yes, probably slight amount of, I would say, variant to the rule number 10, which is around the patience. Because speed is one of the important things, and as you also gave from your examples of the low-hanging fruits or the quick wins to gain the confidence of the management, probably that's where element of speed is an important one as well, where the overall speed of the journey is a factor which has to be considered in a significant manner. Because even though the patience is expected, in reality, the patience is never there. And that's where you need to keep people engaged by some low-hanging fruits, quick wins, which keep them, let's say, keep getting the visibility of things which are coming out of the journey.
I 100% agree with you, Vivek. What we actually do is that we take a MVP approach so that we start delivering value quicker for businesses. In a sense, tying into what you were saying, the reason is that sometimes for us, these MVPs are, like what you said, very quick wins, and they sometimes don't translate to the estimated business value in the end. So we've had cases where businesses have questions saying, hey, you guys said you did something digital, but the scale that you spoke about vis-a-vis what you've done, there is a bit of a dichotomy. So we don't state that explicitly that, look, we'll deliver value immediately. But when we do our projects, we do take an MVP based approach that segments each phase and establishes deliverables for each. So while business is tied in for the larger journey, which may be 2 or 3 years, they start seeing value in intermittent phases, which again feeds into that virtuous cycle. They say, hey, look, I've seen value only with this small amount of investment. Let me go ahead and see what the whole journey entails. Completely agree with what you're saying there.
So if I can add something here, I think this is where something called as the heartbeat methodology works, because you take some time to pick the right project and then implement it quickly so that business sees value, and then take some time for you to pick the next project, identify the right project for the next one, and then again quickly develop and deliver the project so that the business can see value. And if you keep doing this, what happens is you're in a rhythm, and once the rhythm is established, it becomes much easier for you to go back to business and ask for funding, as well as business. At some point in time, business will come to you and say, okay, why have you not done something in the last 3 months or 4 months?
Yes.
I think that's something that is important to keep in mind as well. Sorry,
You've
Rahul,
hit,
go on.
yeah, you've hit the nail on the head, Mukesh. So that's exactly it, right? I mean, when they start seeing value, they actually start chasing you, saying, okay, let's do something further. And there are times when you say, look, you're still not that mature that we can do something further. You guys have to wait for a bit while the data matures or while your customers start maturing and start adopting further. So you hit really the nail on the head there, so to speak. Quickly moving on, one of the ways that we try to get businesses to move faster is we show the slide, and this is a standard in any slide that we show any of our businesses that are relatively hesitant to this, saying, look, disruption is here to stay. And we tell them, take any industry. Has your life not become digital in that in the last few years? And invariably the answer is yes. One industry that really was or one segment that I should say that really hesitated was always manufacturing teams. But over time, at least the last 1 year has seen a lot of disruption in the auto space. So right now I'll actually they are actually pushing us to digitize them and transform them more than all our other businesses put together. So when a lot of businesses see these slides, see the list of companies that have gone through and the list of sectors, it's a big impetus for them to start making a change in their whole way they're looking at digital. The next couple of slides, I'll be talking about how we actually guide a particular business or a company through the digital journey, so to say. We have two cases here. One is particularly for an industry where we define what we call as tipping points. And I'll tell you how it applies to the Mahindra context and how it varies for various businesses. And the second is when you start doing digital transformation for a business, how it follows a particular scheme. And these are proven theories outside that we have tried to adapt and actually have seen that it is holding true for our businesses. And hence, I thought I can share it with the larger forum here. By digital tipping points, so what we've observed is that, when a digital trend starts taking up, it is typically something that is new, that customers do very informally, or customers or your allied customers start doing. So to give you a case in point, this is a case from the auto sector. We started observing a lot of our fleet customers, who run a lot of taxi cabs or who run a lot of transport. In case of Mahindra, a lot of transport, a lot of pickup vehicles. They started once mobile started penetrating quite early. They started trying to SMS every morning when these people would meet at a local mandi. These transporters used to SMS all their customers saying, hey, look, I have 10 vehicles available. Which of you wants to take it for rent? And this is the price that I'm targeting. And over time, we started to see a lot of innovative startups like the Ubers and Olas come up that really decided to commercialize this. A lot of early adopter customers take this up. Then advanced incumbents, people like who are relatively resistant to see that this is gathering momentum, start to pick up. And then the whole world, it comes to actually a tipping point where people are talking about how the auto industry in itself has changed because of the entrance of a digital technology like mobile phone and data and an app. That people are saying people are not buying cars or not buying vehicles because they want to go on for the on-demand way, where they want to just hire a vehicle for when and where they want it. So this graph actually, when we look back, it actually held a lot of relevance for us. We had seen the earlier trends that emerged. We saw that a lot of innovative companies were coming up. We didn't really engage with them at that point of time. It was when, say, the advanced adopters sort of come in is when we really start engaging with them. And as a company, by the time we reach that tipping point is when we need to really be ready so that we take the top blue curve and not go on the bottom pink curve, and where we don't become a laggard or an incumbent and really suffer and start complaining that, look, people don't want to buy cars anymore, they'd rather go on higher. So this graph actually, and this is true across a lot of businesses that we have seen where these digital trends have emerged. And we actually really follow it. And one of my roles in the group is to sort of spot these new trends as they emerge. And pretty much I can say that across all the businesses that Mahindra operates, from automotive to the farm sector to agri, hospitality, etc., the amount of digitization is quite significant that almost all our businesses are near the advanced incumbents need to adopt digital phase, which is why you see a lot of push. And our role here fundamentally then becomes, if we move on to the next slide, is okay, so you've decided you really need to digitize, right? And what do you need to really do such that you sustain this phase of digitization? So most companies in our group have now realized the need to digitize and have identified certain projects that they need to do. So they believe that they are on a road that is going up. So for example, if I can take the example of a farm business, they started looking at precision farming in a large extent and trying to see how can we actually double our farmers' income. This is a very promising road. A lot of investment has been made and we are going up. But at the same time, our belief is that unless you quickly find out other wins while you're on this upward journey and start focusing on those, you will reach a plateau and you'll start declining. One of our businesses, which for reasons I can't name now, actually was one of the early adopters here. It was in the space of automotive service. They had digitized much early, much ahead of any of these incumbents were there. But having said that, they did not ideate further. So they are sort of in a plateau now, trying to find out how can they now spur back digitization or spur back some form of disruption in their segment so that they can take it forward. So it's very critical that while you're digitizing, while you're developing something disruptive, once you've established a bit of momentum, you really look at the next one that is there in the pipeline, and which brings about the importance of maintaining a digital pipeline and hence creating that business value constantly so that you're on this constant virtuous cycle journey. And at no point do you ever feel that you're going to plateau. It's a digital alarm. I mean, a lot of businesses say, look, I've launched a product, let it run for a while. It's a cash cow for me. I think in the digital domain, cash cows as such don't exist. I think if you are a cash cow, while it is banned physically, I think you will be slaughtered in the digital domain very quickly by any new incumbent that's going to disrupt you very fast. So it's very important that you keep innovating and keep taking the value that you've created forward. So at this point, I'll take a quick pause and I'll sort of open up for questions. I'm sure that there would be some debate on where we are at as a company. And
so I'm just launching a poll. So if people can respond to that poll, let me, so maybe, a minute or so for everyone to kind of respond to this poll. So 50% have responded. So maybe, the rest of you, if you can respond as well, that'll be great. So another 15 seconds maybe. Okay, so let me just end the poll and publish what is the result. So here is the result. Okay.
Interesting, yeah. So one insight for us is that you really don't know a tipping point till it really hits you. And once you hit the first tipping point, then you will be aware of any other tipping point that comes through, which is true. I mean, that's how we as Mahindra also felt it. So I'm sure that's true for most businesses. The good thing is digital transformation and disruption is a relatively new trend. So a lot of us are on the early part of the curve. So I think one takeaway could be that we should all really start looking out for these tipping points in our businesses. But I'm happy to see a lot of people have seen these tipping points in businesses as well. I think that's quite critical in establishing the value for disruptive transformation. So quickly moving on, this slide sort of talks about the various business models that are there, and these vary multiple. Across various businesses. The fit is also very different. You would have in the same business an on-demand model as well as a subscription-based model that we do. And some businesses may not even use any of these, and I'll come to that sort of later. But in essence, when you look at the entire disruption domain, these 8 odd models, 7 or 8 odd models actually really stand out in the fact that they've been proven that these can actually be profitable, and these actually lead to sustainable disruption in the end. I will have a couple of slides where I'll talk about each of these models. I'm sure that this forum is very familiar with all of them. I'll try to highlight 2 or 3 key interesting insights that I have taken and hence have sort of spoken about within the group. And please feel free to add. I'm sure all of you have a lot of views on these models, so please feel free to add during any of these slides and we can have a debate on it. So the first model is the open source model, right? For a lot of businesses today, it's relatively tough to go open source. And the example that we have is of Mozilla, which is a not-for-profit company. And a lot of this open source model generates a lot of money from a lot of royalties, etc., that you can generate out of the business value that you've created. One company that I have seen, which has really gone open source, so to say, but not really open source, but really democratized its knowledge, was Tesla, when it democratized all its battery technology at that point. Now they've gone further, and all the further technology that they have worked on has become proprietary, but till a point they have democratized it fundamentally with the idea of getting more people. See, the problem at that time, I guess, for Tesla was people were very circumspect on the technology that they were using. So to overcome that, they actually decided to democratize all the knowledge and technology that they had, so to say, and ask the world to use it. The other way Tesla have gone about it is that given this technology, they've engaged with battery manufacturers very successfully to develop customized battery cells for use in the EV domain. This has actually led them to create these large giga battery cell factories and in a way become a revenue center for them. So an open source model as such looks like, look, there is not much of revenue opportunity for you. But having said that, if you have something that's really innovative that you find the market is finding quite hard to use, maybe going open source where you open up this knowledge and look at partnerships or royalties from people who will use that to take it forward is one way that you can look at it. We as a group at Mahindra have not been able to do it, so to say, but I'm happy to hear anybody else's thoughts on this and anybody in the forum who thinks this may be a good fit for you, because in the disruption domain, this is something that's very new. And for me personally, something that's very at the core of digital disruption, because digital talks all about democratizing technology and access, right? So if people are able to do an open source model successfully at scale, that really for me personally shows that digital has actually really worked here. The next model is the free model. I mean, and this is something that we've been using for a long time, which is basically Google search. And the key here is, while we all know how Google works, there is a distinct value proposition for each of the participants that are there in the value chain. The key here is actually trying to find out that unique value proposition, which comes down to what we had referred to as rule number 2, is establishing that critical customer value in the whole chain. So Google was successfully able to find out its value for a user of search, value for the publisher, and value for the various businesses, and hence able to extract value from each of them, and hence creating a virtuous cycle. That's a phrase that I'll refer to a lot, because that's how digital sustains itself, that the more people that search, the more publishers that are there, and the more users that are there on the platform. So that's a model that's been there. Again, for us as a group, we have really not had a free model, so to say, deployed. But I think this is also very relevant for companies that have a lot of digital assets that can get more people to use it and try to monetize it further. The next is the more freemium model, so to say. Now, this has gone through a lot of change, and freemium has sort of become, can I make a platform free model kind of an approach? The best example for this is Spotify. And I guess a lot of us know how Spotify works, and most of us are premium subscribers for Spotify. And that's how their revenue figures also stack up. the ad supported revenue is relatively or less, about 10% of their overall revenue mix. And you would actually see that the number of people who start using Spotify, the amount of people that actually convert and start paying for their services is relatively significant. So almost 90% of users go ahead and buying a subscription. And that in a sense is how the freemium model works. Now the challenge there is, what is the level that you leave free? So let me take a step back here and talk about something that we did in Mahindra. We launched something for the farmers to use, an app that would tell you what's the weather in your area and what you need to do. We found out that, and we had a very small token price where, a farmer could actually get very precise advice for his particular plot of farm that he's using. We actually found out that a lot of farmers were actually downloading the app and they were using, the general service. But we found that in a particular area, which is say about, say the size of a village in rural India, we'd find only just 1 or 2 people taking up the subscription. And we said, okay, I mean, this is quite odd. Why is this happening? So we actually went down and found it was a community subscription. So the community of 10 guys used to take a subscription on a guy's name, and they used to draw all the insights out of that app. So we said that, look, I mean, while it was, the value that was sort of delivered was appropriated by multiple stakeholders. So we are sort of now trying to reinvent this whole model, but in a sense that was one of our experiences with a freemium model. As long as your free layer content is very relevant to the customers, you should actually see people go ahead and pay money and actually avail your services. And how that happens, what is the business model around it, whether it is a user or a set of users, is always a question. And even companies like Spotify in India, right? In India, people don't take individual subscriptions, they take family subscriptions. So my Spotify playlist varies every day. So my daughter listens to her songs, my wife listens to her songs. So when I go back for my drive, my recommendations are all over the place. I suddenly get Ringa Ringa Roses when I just play it. So even companies like Spotify and Amazons of the world are trying to figure out how this works for them in India, where sharing is the way of life here. So that's something that we'll need to reinvent and find out something that works. But in a sense, the freemium model, to summarize, sort of relies on the free content being very relevant to your user, and hence able to convert that guy to a paying customer. The next one we'll talk about is a subscription-based model. And I guess, I'm sure if Mukesh even runs a poll, all of us are subscribed to some form of Netflix or Amazon Prime or Hotstar, where we pay for content, pay for access on a monthly basis or a yearly basis. Again, a lot depends on the content and the medium of delivery. So to step back to the example I quoted in the last slide, we said, okay, let's not make this a freemium model, because people are using your free service, and in the end, Mahindra is paying a lot of money for free service. Can I just make it a subscription model? Maybe I go to a particular panchayat or a village elder and say, look, why don't you take this subscription for your village? And all of you can then get together and decide what to do. And we actually found out that when that happened, people were quite willing to do that. They said, look, we can all pool in. We do a lot of this. So we are willing to pool in, and it becomes a village subscription. And we naturally added more features on top of what we are doing. What we realized in the end is, while we did it, the key thing there that we had developed was the content that we delivered was so unique that people were willing to pay for it because this content was very unique in the world. In India, that we were trying to offer, that was bundled in one platform. Otherwise, they were not getting, they had to get it disaggregated. They had an agronomist who was an agricultural scientist visit them once a month to give them advice. And imagine about 50 farmers standing in line to meet this guy who comes there one day every week. So that was the challenge that they were facing. And that's why they said, look, we are willing to subscribe for this. And right now, this model is deployed as a subscription model in some places, where we are running a pilot and seeing how successful can that be, and a freemium model in other places to see if we can get more customers to adopt. But in essence, the subscription model, earlier in the freemium model, if you remember, we spoke about the content in the free layer being very good. In subscription model, the content that you're going to provide at the end has to be really unique, that the customer is willing to pay for it, and hence avail of its services.
So just to add to what you said, Rahul, I think one of the important things when it comes to digital transformation is also this ability to experiment, see what is happening, postulate theories, and go back and test which theories actually pan out, and based on what pans out, scale what is relevant.
Yes, 100% agree. So, I mean, my examples that I'm quoting are like that. We're just running live experiments to see which works and which is more successful. So, I think that is at the core of digital in itself. The next one is about e-commerce. I am not going to spend too much of time here. I guess all of us are familiar with the e-commerce model. Only thing that I would say is of more value than how it works is that it's very, very easily scalable. If you have an e-commerce setup, tomorrow you can move to an entirely new geography and just open it with very minimal investment, be it on the technology side or on the physical location, etc. side. And given the amount of services, etc., that have come about, I think this today has become a no-brainer. I think even we are trying to sell cars online. That's how it has become. So something that all businesses should do if you're doing, really look at how you can move to the e-commerce route. The next is something that was of lot of relevance to us as a company, given that we are predominantly an auto player, which is the on-demand model. And in the on-demand model, I'll also talk a lot about the two-sided marketplace model. E-commerce, fundamentally, you can say is a one-sided marketplace. On-demand as such, and particularly Uber, if you take that as an example, makes it a two-sided marketplace, so to say. Here, actually, the key to success is having a relatively good supply of both customers as well as people who are willing to provide their services on your platform. Typically, for companies, it's either one or the other. It's very, very tough to do both at the same time. And that's where the whole bit of partnerships really pays in. Can you tie in? Can you tie up with people? Maybe you have a lot of customers. Can you tie up with somebody who can ensure supply of the relevant product so that you establish that marketplace? We as a company really look at these as opportunities for partnerships, because we are typically strong on the customer side. It's typically on the other side where you need support, which is typically on in places where you need supply. Can I look at 10 people who can provide supply for me? Can I have a partner who can ensure supply for me? Is where we'll really look at this place here. Moving on, an extension of the previous model is what we call as the peer-to-peer model. And here it is all about, can I enable peer-to-peer sharing? So it may not be a particular marketplace, so to say, but it is something that, look, I have a vehicle, can I rent it out to Mukesh so that he can use it when he really wants it, and I have no use for that vehicle. And an extension of this is, if I was a guy who said, look, I have an idle car, let me give it out to Mukesh, who may probably drive for it on a marketplace like Uber, and he makes money in the end, even I make money. So that's the extension to which this model has gone. For a customer-driven company like ours, a peer-to-peer model made a lot more sense than a two-sided model, which is why if you see Mahindra, we were quite hesitant in trying to engage with the Ubers and the Olas of the world, because we believe that the peer-to-peer model held a lot more value for us, because that still kept us close to the customers who are our source of strength. So we try to experiment a lot of variations of this. We try to give customers weekend adventures, so-called Mahindra adventures, where they could hire a Mahindra vehicle to go for a weekend adventure drive. We even created adventure parks where they could go and experience some of this. We tied up with some of these companies that offer car on a sharing model, etc., for your weekend drives, etc. And it's only when the Ubers of the world have sort of matured and they have a mature ecosystem of driver partners that we can really start engaging with them in terms of how can I get drivers to buy drivers on Uber platforms to buy our vehicles. So while we could not directly engage with them initially, the peer-to-peer model sort of served as our digital experimenting ground where we could try out a lot of our models. And we had structured this. It is quite a successful model for us, though not really at the scales of the Ubers and Olas of the world. It in itself is a self-sustaining business to the extent that we are looking at expanding this adventure model across the country. Right now, it's running in a couple of cities in India, but we're really looking at scaling it up as soon as possible. The next one is again something that really comes from a digital mindset, which is a lot of ad-based revenue. Uh, and I'm sure all of us know about this. And I'll give you a very interesting story from the Mahindra side. You would have heard of this app called Tringo that was launched by Mahindra, which is about a tractor rental model. It's like, while I'm loath to say this, and I'll explain why, but it was like the Uber for tractors, very simply. Uh, we found actually that almost we had this deployed in Karnataka and Maharashtra, and the app, I think you can check it out on the Google Play Store, had almost 2 or 3 million downloads. Uh, but the amount of transactions was relatively minuscule. So we found that we had a lot of active users who would actually go out and see, but a lot of transactions, etc., it was taking time to pick up. And given that we were a digital business, we had staked our neck out in saying, look, we'll be sustainable within 6 months, and made a lot of commitments to our business. And a result of that was rule number 10, where we, after our experience there, we said, look, businesses should be eternally patient and trust in the business model. We found that, we were not really making too much money. So, but we said, look, we have a bunch of active users on that. So what can we do? So a person on our team came up with the idea of, look, can I start advertising agri produce on this? And overnight, we sort of pioneered agri produce advertisements on a digital platform on this app. And while it definitely is not the core, but it actually at least helped us over the initial hump and saying, look, the business is making money, but don't ask us how. So ad-based revenue really works when you have an established product out there, which you can try to use for relevant targeted advertising for your customers. So targeting is right. I mean, if you start showing them ads for gold or maybe cars, that would be like, I should really uninstall this app, is really not helping me in any way. But targeted relevant advertisements does help, but your technology or your digital tool needs to really have been matured, and it needs to have scale for you to try this out.
So just to add to what you just said, Rahul, I think this is also an important point when it comes to driving digital transformation, which is not everything will go the way you expect it to go. So you expect a certain project to play out a certain way, but there'll always be surprises. Now, the point is, how do you take those surprises and explore what is causing those surprises, and use a little bit of creativity to kind of marry, accept that surprise, and then do something about it, so that you still make something out of what you've done so far. And that is pretty critical, because a lot of times what happens is, they say they try something, doesn't work out, they just shut it down and move on to the next one. That generally is probably not a great idea, so to say. Yeah. Sorry, go on, please.
I 100% agree with you. I mean, we were lucky that we had a agri business that was willing to advertise on us. So had a lot of synergy there. But you are right. This really is not the core of your business, particularly if you are a company that's core business is something else. But this is something that can at times really help you, because as a company, you'll invest a lot in getting your product or solution adopted across the market. And once that is done, I'm sure there are phases where it's ups and downs. These kind of models really help you come over those troughs, so to say. The last point is the hidden revenue model. This is something that I like to say is actually the first ever digital revenue model that was discovered. And by that, I mean, all the companies use CRM in some form, and you try to use that information to get revenue out of your customers. So we've all been doing this, but we decided that when Facebook did it, it was not really right for them to do it. I mean, I felt a bit hypocritical, but the extent to which they took it was definitely not very palatable to all of us. But having said that, how can I use information that is very unique to me? So I as Mahindra would have very unique information about the way a guy uses a car. So can I build on that to create revenue? Is there a way that when a guy is driving his car, can I send him a trigger saying, hey, you have driven your car for X odd kilometers, do you want to change your tires? And here is an ad from XYZ tire company that gives you a special offer. Now, can I try to monetize that? Can I then enter a partnership with that tire company and say, look, for every tire you sell, I get say 5% or 10% in some form. So is there a particular way that I can do it? Is something that, is there some data point or some unique property that I have that I can monetize, which may not be my direct stream? or my stated purpose of why I'm doing it. So that in essence would summarize the hidden revenue model. It still, to me, remains as the oldest digital business model, and in a way why digital sort of started happening. So at this point, I will sort of take a pause. We've run through a set of business models that we in many firms would be adopting. Would request the audience to sort of give their views and sort of ask for any feedback here from them.
If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, maybe now is a good time to either unmute yourself or put it on the chat. We'll just wait for a minute or so to see if someone has any comments. Otherwise, we can just move to the next set of slides then. So anyone has any question, thoughts, comments about what you've heard so far? I think most of what you've heard is known in some form or factor. So no rocket science there, but it is still important to refresh this for ourselves every now and then, so that we do not forget about all of these models. Because a lot of times, what happens is, in the flow of your day-to-day activities, some of these enter into the back burner, and then when opportunity arises, you're not ready for taking it up from that perspective. So looks like there are no comments, Rahul. Maybe you can go.
We'll move on. Sure.
Yeah.
So now that we have seen all of this, there are some rules that we sort of follow in Mahindra, which is that we really don't want to call ourselves the X of Y in digital transformation parlance. By that, we don't want to call ourselves, like what I said, the Uber of tractors. So, and while this generates a lot of buzz, like the cartoon says, people say, oh, wow, you're the Uber of tractors. That sounds very interesting and promising. It actually really dilutes the sensitivities in each and every business transformation that you're doing. The tractor, the Tringo app that we have has very, very different economics compared to what a Uber or Olas of the world would have. So we really don't want to call ourselves the X of Y or anything that we do the X of anything, so to say. But what we really want to focus on is that there are a set of 7 or 8 established business models. Now, how am I using a flavor of each of those business models? Now, for example, the example that I gave you, right? For Tringo, I ended up using an ad-based business model for a year or so to sustain the app while the tractor, while on-demand tractors was an idea picked up. So I may go through multiple business models, so I may never have one fixed business model. So I never really want to be bracketed into any of these business models. And and this is a challenge for businesses any day, right? I mean, businesses are running clear that I make a profit by doing XYZ activities and delivering business value. In the digital domain, it may be really hard to define those XYZ values for a couple of years at least, while you get enough traction and people start adopting and you really reach that tipping point in your particular domain that you are doing. So for all of that, you never really want to be bracketed as doing any particular, hey, here is an ad-based business model and here are the revenues. You sort of really need to be open to the idea of moving across these business models. And that is a real challenge. So while doing digital transformation is quite easy, when you come to this particular hump, when you actually go back to a business or any company and say, look, I was doing this, but I think I may do this also, or I may pivot my entire business model to this, becomes the biggest challenge, particularly in established companies, given that they have their own set of financial norms, etc. So it becomes incumbent on change agents like us to sort of be very conscious of that fact and be very conscious of these change points or tipping points, so that we highlight businesses and bring it to their attention well in advance, so that they also find these changes palatable and are able to support you in this journey going forward. So we have actually call each disruption a disruption. We actually tell it as it is. So we call it, look, I'm using AI to solve a manufacturing problem. I don't say, look, I'm becoming the new Tesla of the world or something like that. I particularly say, look, I'm picking this technology, I'm solving this problem, and here is the journey that I'll go through. So that is something that we really follow here, and I think that is something that businesses also appreciate. And the other thing is that what we realized is that a lot of cases, disruption just for the sake of disruption is something that we don't do. Our group prevents us just because of the financial expectations that we have set on ourselves. We aim to be, as a company that's doing digital, we aim to be cash neutral. By cash neutral, I mean the company, the initiative generates its own revenues to sustain itself within 6 months to a year. So giving us that very, very high hurdle rate gives us a challenge, so that we don't do things just for the sake of doing. Otherwise, there'd be literally hundreds of Mahindra apps and hundreds of digital ideas that are coming out, and people putting money behind it just for the sake of doing it. So setting a very high counter to the urge to do something innovative just for the sake of doing is quite critical. And in our case, that's a financial metric. Various other metrics work for other companies. Maybe consolidation is something that I've heard about, where people say, look, I will select one keystone initiative and that will be everything that I do. So multiple things work for whatever works for you. So, but realizing that you just should not disrupt for the sake of disrupting is critical. In the end, it dilutes the impact of digital for everybody. What we actually believe in the end is about how can I redefine the customer journey such that he becomes more attuned to what Mahindra is trying to do. Now, the cartoon is really apt. It captures it, right? I mean, all of us do it. We go to the shopping mall, see what we want, and then buy it on Amazon or Flipkart, etc. So how can I actually tap into that changing customer expectation using digital? Am I really understanding what the customer wants? And hence, am I doing something that is relevant for his changing expectation is something that we always look at in whatever we do. And that sort of holds good. We may end up doing only just one or two initiatives, but if it's close to what the customer wants, we actually see that customers end up accepting all the changes that we end up doing. Okay, I'll take a pause maybe here. I'm sure a lot of the points that I mentioned were resonate in some form with the audience. I'd like to hear if they have any different views that when they did digital transformation in their organizations, whether they had any different views, etc.
So any questions, comments? Looks like there are no comments, Rahul. Maybe you can go on.
Let me move ahead then. So I have the next couple of slides actually talk about how disruption gets classified in Mahindra. Given that we've been doing this for the last 4 or 5 years, how do we actually look at any transformation we take up? While this is not comprehensive in any way, and after this presentation, I may go back and actually change the whole thing up. But this just gives you an idea of how we actually structure it and the various transformations we have done and what are the kind of metrics that we look at. So for us, digital disruption broadly breaks up into two. One are current processes. So current processes would mean maybe something as an operational parameter that I'm doing. And second would be something that I'm doing, say, as a sales parameter, which is when I go and sell the product. These are the two current processes that we have, operational and in terms of revenue generation. And in each case, our defined goal is clear. In the case of sales, it's about increasing top line. So can I do any disruption? Sorry, was there a question?
Yeah, there was a question, which is, what is a typical project timeline that you have at Mahindra? Assuming that you're on Agile, what would be an ideal sprint?
So again, focusing, I'll now take just one of our businesses, say the auto business, because this even varies across our businesses. Some are small, some are big, hence. But typically an auto MVP, if you break the project down into MVPs, each MVP lasts about 3 months. Each sprint is about 2 weeks for us. So typically we run 3 or 4 sprints to deliver maybe about 4 to 5 sprints to deliver a particular MVP. And that's how we also break down the MVPs as such. Large transformations, typically we take up are about a year or year and a half in size, which would involve, creation of an entirely maybe a new digital product, so to say, or a digital tool, typically a year and a half. But like what Vivek was talking about earlier, we focus on delivering MVPs that can be deployed immediately. So the end of 3 months, we sort of deliver something that businesses can start using and start seeing value in. Does that answer your question, Shabarish?
I think it does, yeah.
Cool. So moving back here to the disruption case. So when we look at increasing top line, it's about digital tools that I can deploy for my sales team, for my marketing team, etc., that I can directly correlate to a revenue metric. And this is slightly tricky at times. We've had digital tools that we deployed saying we'll increase top line, that ended up reducing a lot of operational costs. So one of which was where we introduced a new way for dealer to capture customer insights. And it was an AI-based tool that we did. We actually found that after a year of having this tool out, we actually went to dealerships to get their feedback. And they were quite appreciative of this. They said, look, it actually helped us reduce about 2 manpower that were there. And it was very surprising for us because that was never really the intended objective. So then when we probed further, we found that this tool would give very specific insights that it actually reduced the time to sell for car dealership. So if you said a selling cycle takes a month, if I as Rahul logged in and said, look, I'm looking for this car, and then very tailored output saying, hey, Rahul likes to go for long drives, so you should really talk about the power of the car XUV 500 when it goes for the drive, etc. It actually helped him convince the customer faster because he could tailor his pitch better such that the selling time dropped significantly enough that they were willing to look at reducing a bit of the sales force to compensate for this. So typically there is an organized way you do go about this. So while we targeted something at increasing top line, we found that there were operational improvements also. The second part is where we deal with operations. So right now we are engaged with the SAP team and looking at how we can deploy AI as a tool across our manufacturing plants and look at various projects there. So in that case, the objective is very clear. I need to reduce the cost of manufacturing. And this may be in terms of quality costs, in terms of improving throughput, etc. But my overall cost of the product, cost of goods, so to say, comes down. So that would be the stated objective of projects like these. And these projects are very clear because they have very defined outcomes and very clear deliverables. The only thing is I'm using a very disruptive technology. So a lot of the cultural issue that we spoke about in rules 8 to rules 10 really play a significant role because as all of you would be aware, manufacturing is a very, very organized. They have their own set of reporting standards, etc. And trying to get a digital technology where I do an agile sprint-based approach is at times very, very chaotic for these people. So how do I get that cultural aspect ingrained? Involves a lot of work with people. That is a bigger challenge in these kind of projects. The next set where the impact leads to creation of entirely new processes and sometimes new businesses is the other aspect. A lot of the customer experience work that we do boils down to a lot of these new processes. For example, it involves a lot of depth of understanding of what you are developing. So we had developed an app for one of our businesses, which actually didn't have an app earlier at all. What happened there in that case was we found that customers prefer to use apps nowadays. And I mean, this is, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but all of us use apps for doing any transaction rather than log on to a website and do stuff there. So we developed this app saying, look, I'm trying to change customers' experience of working with Mahindra. So here is this app. We actually found that that app actually started as a tool to increase the top line. Where you found a lot of people downloading the app and then they were making inquiries on how can they get these products out of these apps so they can become paying customers for the product. So at times you do solutions that you believe are for changing customer experience, but they end up helping you in increasing your top line also. So you need to actually really deep dive into the metric and say, look, my stated objective is this. And as a lag indicator, maybe look at all of these other metrics, but clearly define what you're trying to do and what its metrics upfront. And the ancillary benefits that you get really, again, start feeding into that virtuous cycle that I keep speaking about. the last thing that we end up doing in digital, which is probably the biggest, is creating of new businesses. We try to, well, all the digital interventions we do are sort of businesses because we try to make them cash neutral within 6 or 12 months. A new business sort of creates a new entirety in itself. It has its own teams, etc., and it has its own P&L. It becomes its own company with the aim of going public sometime in the future. All these new businesses that Mahindra today is creating all have a lot of digital DNA in the back end. And having said that, the pressure to turn around fast becomes very high. I mean, compared to a traditional investment model where you have a 3-year payback calendar goes for a toss and people start asking you for revenues within 6-7 months of actually creating this business and running it on the ground. So that is the last area which occupies a lot of top of mind for leadership and a top of mind outside when people look at the work that you do. Sorry, was that a question?
No, so I just wanted to maybe add a point there, Rahul, which is a lot of times what happens is when you're trying to run digital transformation projects, people typically tend to think like project managers. So 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the things that you need to do and all of that. Whereas a truly successful digital transformation guys who run true digital transformation think like product managers. They are creating products. So instead of thinking and acting like project managers, I think it is a lot more beneficial and a lot more successful if you start and act like a product manager. That way, the entire shift in mindset, the entire shift in the approach is much more suited to digital transformation than thinking like a project manager. So that's just I want to add.
Great point. I 100% agree with you, Mukesh, there. And the brutal way of making people do this is when you give them ownership for P&L and say, boss, you have to, within 6 months. So the onus is really back on them, and that's when they really become product owners. We found that to be extremely successful. But over time, like what you said, their views are maturing, and whenever anybody takes up something new in digital, they really start becoming product owners and start talking from that lens rather than saying, look, I've implemented this and this has gone live. That's where program manager's role would end. So we are seeing that change. It is gradual and it varies across businesses. Maybe businesses that are facing customer facing are more, it's easier to become product owners there. Maybe businesses that are more back end facing, it's hard to become that. But I guess you use whatever tools you need to use to drive that transformation at that point. Okay. Focusing on the slide that we have, it deals with a lot of the topics that I spoke about earlier in terms of what are some of the metrics that we use to capture some of these benefits that we are trying to deliver. I've just given a very small list. Particularly in the second area, which is on new processes, it's very, very hard to define what is the metric going to be. But one key thing, if I can give you, is that which really helps us is you identify one lead metric, which is something that business can see value from day zero when you deploy that tool. That's something they can immediately start seeing. So that actually we believe adds a lot of value. A lot of the metrics that I've written there are sort of lag metrics, and they sometimes have the biggest quantum benefit, fortunately or unfortunately. But try to identify one lead metric. It may be something very small. For example, when we developed an app, we said, the first metric that you need to, while it is not a very good metric to capture, we said the first metric you need to see is number of downloads. And we found that, in a matter of 2 weeks, we had almost 1 lakh of people using that app. And we said, look, it's very successful. 1 lakh of my customers have gone on the app, right? And businesses can then rationalize a bit and say, look, yes, actually, there is a bit of traction. And we then try to work out and try to push the lag metrics and try to move them forward as quickly as possible. If there is one thing that I can give you as a tidbit that really works, is that identify one lead metric. It may be very small, very trivial, but once you do identify that, and once you actually start seeing the improvement, immediately try to publicize it and try to generate a lot of buzz around it so that people are bought into the hype of the whole journey as such. Okay, maybe I'll take another quick pause here. I think we'll be running just on time. Any questions, etc., any feedback on the Mahindra methodology? I'm open to hearing your feedback so that maybe if Mukesh asks this slide later, I can quickly make some more changes and the next thing make it ready.
So, Rahul, if I may ask a question here, it is, in the last 4 years that you have been doing this at M&M, what has been the biggest challenge or hurdle that you have faced, and how do you address that?
Uh, so there have been two hurdles that across time, I would say. The first is definitely the business value. We initially really struggled in telling a business what value am I going to deliver to you. Because a lot of what we spoke about were just lag metrics, right? I could tell you that you will get your customer retention will improve, but that's not something that he'll see even within 6 months. He'll see that after a year. So one was that, and that's when we said let's focus on a lead metric and let's see establish relevance of that lead metric to business. Secondly was when we take a larger transformation journey, when we took an MVP based approach, we tried to tailor the first MVP in such a way it delivered a lot of value to business. So we tried to take a lot of these approaches on delivering business value. Not that it's as a concern it's gone off, it's something that is at the top of our mind, something that we always focus on when we take something up, a new project up. The second thing is the culture change mindset, and this is very relevant to teams that already have a very defined operational method of working. So in that particular case, for us it is a big challenge in driving cultural change. We do a lot of training, so we conduct a lot of agile. I'm a certified Scrum professional. We have a lot of team members that are. We conduct some operational training. We do a lot of digital evangelism there. We talk about a lot of companies that do digital. We rely a lot on our partners like SAP, etc., who come and talk a lot about the transformation that's driven and how this can be sustained over time. Sorry, you had a question, Mukesh? Hello? Hello, can you hear me? I think your voice is breaking actually. Hello? Hi, can anybody else hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I guess Mukesh is. Let me just let Mukesh know and we try to carry on. Okay. Yeah. Mukesh, I think it's just you. I'm going ahead. Yeah. So I'll just quickly move on in the interest of time also. There are a few companies that I wanted to highlight, that have done new digital things that are quite innovative, so to say. I'm sorry. Hello. Was somebody trying to say something? I'm sorry, I can't hear you properly.
I think it's Mukesh only. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Mukesh, we are going ahead and let's see how it goes. So one of these companies is a company called Exotel. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Exotel, but there is a short video that I'll try to play. I'm not sure if I'm able to play it. Okay, maybe I'll quickly talk about, I think there is some network issue. So let me talk about a few of these companies that are there, so that I sort of wanted to highlight these companies because these companies are doing something digital in a very innovative kind of a way. And there's not something that you really talk about. They are not the Ubers or the Spotifys of the world that we talk about them. But the interesting thing was they've used a lot of these disruptive business models and disruptive technologies in a way to deliver a lot of sustainable value. And these are companies that, while we may all question whether the Ubers and Olas of the world will exist 2 years later, but these are some of the companies that I am sure that they are actually profit making. So they will exist for many years going forward. The first company is Exotel. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Exotel, but it is a company that looks at automating all your call center and customer query needs. Typically replaces the need for you to invest in any of these resources, and you can just sign up for their service online. They give you a phone number. You can share your product documentation with them. You can put your customer support number and they automatically redirect it to their dedicated team of customer support executives that they have on their roll. Or if you have dedicated set of customer support executives, they can redirect it to your customer support executives. And the best part of this is it's a pay as you go model. So it's infinitely scalable till a point where the economics work. If your business is growing and you have a lot of requirements for customer support that you're finding challenging with the existing setup, this is a very interesting business model they've come up. A company is quite interesting, and the way they've sort of cracked it, which is merging a need for customer support from companies, trying to solve their problem of setting up these large infrastructure of a back end of telephones, having this large back end is definitely, they've tried to solve that problem first. And second is when they've tried to solve it and make it easy for the customers by saying, do it as a pay-as-you-go model. So if you use 3 resources this month, just pay me for the 3 resources for which I'm running customer support. So Mukesh, I think you've joined on another device. So can you hear us now?
So I can hear you now. So please go on.
Good, cool, great. So Exotel was one. I am not sure if we'll be able to play the video. If Mukesh, you can just try playing that Exotel video. If not, I'll talk about all of these companies that I've highlighted. Cool, it's okay. I think we'll just move ahead. I'll talk about all these companies that are there. The other company is a company called Smallcase. It is a partnership with India's largest discount broker, Zerodha. So basically, this company had a very unique take on the whole portfolio. Okay. I am not sure if you're all able to see this. I will, yeah, maybe you can play this video, Mukesh. This is a company called InstaMojo. InstaMojo is trying to actually simplify payment solutions for its customers. By customers, these are not the large payment companies like your Amazons and Flipkarts. It's not about creating a payment gateway for them. It's about the small handicraft, or you have a hobby and you sort of want to sell it, or you're an individual who has created a product that you want to sell. InstaMojo is a company where you can go and sort of advertise your product, and sort of they help you get payments from companies, and also resettle it with your bank, etc. So it's sort of like the payment gateway for SMEs and individuals, so to say. A very, very interesting segment to tap. Again, it is a pay for every payment model. So they take a small fee of every payment, similar to any payment gateway, but they are able to customize it for each and every company. Apart from that, they also provide marketplace services where they are able to go and advertise your product on the InstaMojo page. Mukesh, it's fine. I guess I'll walk them through all the videos. it's no problem.
Okay, thanks.
So going back to the small case is a company that bundles some of these stocks based on themes. Now, while all of us are not the investing savants where we can go and pick the right stock, we at least may have our pet sectors where we want to bet on. For example, I like to bet a lot on electric mobility, and I may not know all the companies that are there available in this domain. I would go to small case where they have collected a set of stocks. So there may be a couple of competent battery manufacturers. There may be OEMs that make there may be some OEMs that make some of these batteries, etc. There may be some of these OEMs that make cars, make other components, all bundled together as one small case. And I can go invest a minimum amount in it. The best part of this is they made the minimum amount flexible. So like a mutual fund, you can invest how much ever you want in these small cases, but you can invest basis your theme. And unlike a mutual fund where the logic behind allocation of this is big, where you have expense ratios, this is the same as owning actually a stock, where you can sell and realize the funds from it quite instantly. So a very interesting way of dealing with a problem that is there in terms of opacity in mutual funds, but having a theme around it that you can relate to personally. The more recent development they've done is where you can build your own small case, and which for people like me who really like to play around with this kind of stuff, I like to go build my own small case and see how successful or not I am in this whole domain. So we can move on to the next example, which is about.
No, but I have a question here. Yeah.
Sorry,
So in this case, like I'm just asking about this startup. So it's really not about the disruption of the digital transformation or really the topic, but how do a small case avoid the expense ratio? Yeah, I guess they cannot avoid that.
The lot of the expense ratio for a typical so to take a step back, any mutual fund is an asset management company, right? They
Yes,
invest in the people, etc., analysts who make those picks, and
correct.
that's where the expense comes in. Now, in small case, it's very thematic, right? They say EV. Okay, look, there are 10 companies in EVs, and here are the 10 that you need to do, and the liability on investing that is on you. So for me, say for example, I'm very interested in electric mobility. I go pick the electric mobility small case, and then uh, nothing is guaranteed. It's open to the markets. I believe that this was a very valid option to invest in. And like any brokerage, they'll give you a report that says, electric mobility is expected to grow by X% in the next 5 odd years. And then all the liabilities are on you. Whereas in an asset management company, there is a little bit of onus on the fund manager to deliver some returns. Otherwise, people are not going to invest in your fund. So that's the whole key difference and how they're able to avoid those expenses.
Yeah, correct. I mean, yeah, now I'm clear about the startup. Thank you.
And interestingly, that you asked this, I just read in the papers today that they are actually, this company is actually looking at taking the AMC route also, so
Okay.
that they are able to deliver some amount of guaranteed returns. I guess because of the expertise, etc., that they have gathered and the scale, they are able to go and invest in professionals to actually run these funds also. So
Yeah,
they
very
are sort of
interesting.
backward integrating to the area they disrupted in a sense.
Yeah.
So moving ahead, uh, uh, the next theme that I picked off was UPI as such. UPI is probably the biggest disruptor that I have personally seen in the last 2 odd years. Uh, I have pretty much stopped using my credit card. Everywhere I go, it's UPI. In the morning, today I traveled to Pune in the morning. In fact, I paid for the toll on the Bombay-Pune Expressway using a QR code. I believe that it is quite a very big disruptor in this domain. And uh, there's a company called Cashfree that has actually really caught on to this. And they've built a payment stack that is fully running on UPI for businesses. While they have the standard payment gateways where you can pay using credit cards as a product also, large portion of their product is uh, ingrained into using the UPI framework and helping businesses adopt the UPI framework. And very interestingly, while we have seen a lot of the payment gateways now being sold, companies like Quicksilver, which Amazon has bought for certain amount of money, Cashfree in recent reports has come out to be the fastest growing payment gateway provider, given their expertise on using the UPI stack. Now, granted, it's not something that's very proprietary to them, but it's given them a very big first mover advantage. And a lot of the payment portals or e-commerce sites are relying a lot on Cashfree, particularly for their UPI integrations.
Rahul, I think for some strange reason, my laptop just shut down. So I don't
No
think you will
issues.
be able to use the slides.
No problem.
So,
No issues at all. So I have them anyway in front of me. So these were some of the examples that I had that I sort of wanted to highlight. The third thing, the last one that I wanted to leave you with is something that's very close and relevant to me today. I am now working on a large project with our manufacturing team on how can we digitize them. And one of the areas that we are sort of trying to look at is how can I deploy a lot of intelligent robotics on our shop floors. And at this time, I came to across this company called Grey Orange. Uh, Grey Orange is a company that has actually created automated warehouses using smart robotics, basically stacking and storing robots to the scale that companies like Amazon and the Flipkarts of the world outside India. In India, it's relatively a newer domain, but outside India have all gone for this solution. And it is so precise that the biggest benefit that we saw, and particularly our management saw, is that a lot of the stacking storing job is very physical. I mean, you have people driving forklifts, you have people physically lifting objects and storing it. Quite also dangerous at times, given if you've all seen warehouses, they're stacked pretty high, 5 high, 6 high. At times leads to some amount of accidents and issues. This startup had a very unique way of solving that, had automated, as we call AGVs, automated guided vehicles that go on, smartly interact, and automatically are able to assemble kits, which for an automotive company like Mahindra is very, very relevant, and keep the right kit ready for the right vehicle that's being produced. So this startup was something that's very close to us. And that's a company, yeah, I think like Amit is saying, so a company that we are trying to engage with quite actively and try to see what we do. It's a very interesting company. If it's of relevance to you, I'm happy to put all of you in touch, whoever wants in touch with them. Solving a very unique problem. And the other very unique thing they have done is a lot of these AGVs are very investment heavy, and you think, oh, I have to invest crores and crores in a lot of these things. They have actually taken an model of managed inventory. So they take all the liability of managing it. So they sort of become your third party logistics provider in the industry parlance, but they manage all your inventory and they deliver a certain set of metrics. And as a result of which you pay them on a monthly, quarterly, yearly basis the commitments that they have and the value that they deliver. So in a way, they take off all the hardware obsolescence, not just a pure play robotics company, while technology is their key differentiator. They've also innovated on the business model side. So a great mix where technology really met an interesting business model, and they're seeing rapid adoption, hopefully very soon in India. And maybe we can also showcase that to you at some point later. So these were some of the interesting companies that I wanted to highlight fundamentally because they were solving very, very unique business problems with unique business models. Maybe some food for thought for all of us when we go back, that we can also disrupt quite differently with different business models. So this was the story that I had. Thank you all. And now I guess I'm running very tight on time, so I'll leave it open to Mukesh and all of you for any last questions or comments. I think Mukesh, you're on mute. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Rahul, for taking us through this entire presentation. So maybe right now, if there are any questions, if there are any comments that anyone has, I think in my final comment is that Digital transformation is something that is inevitable in most organizations and in most industries. Now, the challenge that we face is, how do we move from where we are, just traditional business models, traditional businesses, to where we want to be. And that journey is not going to be the same for everybody. It's going to be different. It's going to be with different challenges. It's going to be different because, the cultures are different, the industries are different. But there are certain things which are principally speaking probably the right approach to take. So number one is to think in terms of, what is the highest value that you can bring in the shortest amount of time, and take that project and attack it as a product manager would, or as a startup would attack that problem, which is, think in terms of the product market fit, think in terms of business models, think in terms of, how do you quickly scale revenue, users, or whatever metric that you want to track. And at the same time, also be able to showcase that value back to the management. I think that communication between what we are doing and what impact it is having in the business has to be ongoing and constant. So I think that probably is most critical, and it doesn't end with one go live. I mean, it's just the start. So you need to continually improve it, continually work on it. Version 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, 5.0. My experience tells me that, by the time you come to version 6.0 is when you actually have something that can scale and can really take you to new heights. So any questions, comments for Rahul? Otherwise, I think this has been a good session. Thanks a lot, everyone. I don't know whether you are able to see this, but I'm trying to share a poll. I don't think you're able to see this, right? No poll is coming through.
No, not as.
Okay, so maybe
Mukesh and Rahul, I think I joined very late, basically, but I found it very interesting, actually interesting session. And so what I gathered is that you presented the disruptive business models, basically, right? And Mahindra is one of the examples where I started. So that was one of the established company you mentioned. Yeah, so I think we are also like, normally there are companies who are running on the traditional models, yeah, basically in IT models and processes, etc. So and you've got so many tools and innovations now, yeah. So I think you should take up that who should pick up what, which tools they should adapt, yeah, because there is the confusion all the time and the investment is very high. Do you get my point, basically?
Yeah, I understand, Amit. Yeah, so I actually work in Mahindra, which is why I guess you would have heard a lot of examples from Mahindra.
Yeah.
But totally relate and agree with your point that you made.
So maybe industry-wise, yeah, or
Sure.
yeah. So if you take up that, then that will be interesting to see.
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks, Amit. Thanks for your
Thank
feedback.
you.
so maybe on the chat, if you can just quickly share number one question, answer to the question, did you learn something new and found the session useful? Yes, no, maybe. Would you, is there any particular topic that you want to take us on a deep dive in the next meeting? If there is any particular topic that you want us to cover in the next monthly call that we have, which is 1 month, exactly 30 days from now, 4 weeks from now. So that's something that I can then work with. Last one is that, is there something that you would like to share about how your organization is actually working and addressing the digital transformation? So if yes, just drop in saying yes, so that, I'll reach out to you. And next time around, instead of Rahul, it could be you presenting what you are doing in your organization to address this digital transformation journey. The more variety we have, the more kinds of customers we have in terms of whose journeys we can learn from, the better the entire journey is going to be. So that's probably the reason why we have these monthly calls. So I would be really happy if someone puts up their hand and says that, next month I will deliver this session. So I can see Amit putting up his hand. So thanks a lot, Amit. Anyone, any feedback on the session? Otherwise, I think it was a good session. And I really want to take this opportunity to thank Rahul for taking time and addressing this for everyone. A lot of preparation for you as well. And for everyone else who's on the call, thanks for staying through. 90 minutes is not a small meeting. I know it takes time and effort, a lot of effort to actually stay focused on someone delivering a session for 90 minutes. So thank you so much. So Amit, we'll bring in someone from the pharma or healthcare industry for the next session. Let me reach out to a few guys in that industry and see if we can bring them in. So thank you everyone. If nothing else, then have a great day. And thanks a lot, Rahul, for delivering
Thank
this.
you. Thanks, Mukesh.
I'll
Thanks,
share the
everyone.
recording with everyone. So if you want to share it with your friends, your colleagues, please do so.
Thanks.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks, Mukesh.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
That was a
Bye-bye.
pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.